Lisbon, Portugal's illustrious capital, occupies a unique position in the Western world, both geographically and historically. It sits proudly along the Atlantic Ocean at the mouth of the Tagus River. In a city where the past and present often collide, sometimes elegantly, sometimes chaotically, Lisbon's importance as a political, cultural and economic centre is unquestionable. Lisbon's geography is nothing short of picturesque, assuming you don't mind hills. In fact, Lisbon's topography could well be considered a cardio workout in disguise, as the city is famously built on 7 hills. Located on the westernmost edge of mainland Europe, Lisbon faces the endless expanse of the Atlantic Ocean. Its strategic location has facilitated centuries of exploration and trade, though one might question whether a city on this many hills was really the most practical spot to place a capital. Originally settled by the Phoenicians, Lisbon came under Roman control around the 2nd century BC and was known as Olisipo. During the Roman Empire, it developed into an important trading post. The city's real story began with the Christian Reconquista in 1147, when Afonso I captured Lisbon from the Moors, cementing it as a Christian stronghold. The Age of Discovery followed, and Lisbon emerged as a wealthy maritime city, benefiting from its explorers who went to distant lands. Portuguese navigators like Vasco da Gama departed from Lisbon to chart the globe, returning with gold, spices and new trade routes that made Lisbon one of Europe's wealthiest cities in the 16th century. However, this golden age wasn't to last. In 1755, Lisbon was struck by a devastating earthquake, followed by a tsunami and widespread fires. Most of the city was destroyed in what became known as one of the deadliest natural disasters in European history. Still, if you're going to rebuild after an earthquake, you might as well do it with style. The city was redesigned under the guidance of Prime Minister Marques de Pombal, who introduced the grid layout in the Bairro district that we see today, an urban planning achievement that is still hailed as brilliant, though perhaps lacking the characteristic disorder of Lisbon's older streets. Today, Lisbon is a darling of the European tourism scene, attracting millions of tourists annually. It's not hard to see why. The city offers a heady mix of stunning historical landmarks, cool nightlife, and a gastronomic scene that includes the famous pastéis de nata, custard tarts that have likely lured more tourists than any cultural site ever could. Tourism has become one of the city's primary industries, and with a few million visitors wandering its narrow streets every year, Lisbon has mastered the art of monetizing its charm. With around 550,000 residents in the city proper, Lisbon is hardly a huge metropolis, but it punches above its weight in terms of cultural and economic influence. The broader Lisbon metropolitan area, however, swells to a population of approximately 2.8 million. The city is home to a multicultural population, with significant communities from former Portuguese colonies such as Brazil, Cape Verde and Angola, alongside residents from across Europe. If you find our work informative, please hit the like button to help this video reach a wider audience. It's very important. The history of Castelo de Sao Jorge is often presented as a grand narrative spanning several civilizations. Built in the mid-11th century by the Moors, the castle served as a defensive stronghold before falling into Christian hands. So far, so impressive. However, it turns out that the grand battles and sieges often associated with the castle were less frequent than one might think. Much of its function after the Christian reconquest was largely ceremonial, more about housing royalty in relative comfort than staving off invaders. While it's tempting to romanticize this chronology, it's also worth noting that the castle has seen some reconstructions. What now stands as the proud, unyielding fortress we see today owes more to 20th century restoration efforts than any medieval mastermind. The renovations, particularly those of the 1930s during the Estado Novo regime, were less about historical accuracy and more about constructing a nationalistic symbol of Portugal's imperial past. To give credit where it's due, there is one feature of this castle that unquestionably earns its praise: the views. From the castle's ramparts you can look over Lisbon's red rooftops, the Tagus River, all the way to the far-off Atlantic. Lisbon's position along the Tagus estuary has always made transportation a central concern. For centuries, ferries were the most efficient way to cross the river. Despite these humble beginnings, Lisbon evolved into a city with an almost inevitable need for bridges. Perhaps no bridge in Lisbon is more iconic than the 25th of April Bridge, a suspension bridge whose design has inspired countless comparisons to San Francisco's Golden Gate Bridge. Completed in 1966, and originally named after Portugal's dictator Salazar, it was aptly renamed after the Revolution of 1974. The bridge has since become a symbol of political freedom, though, ironically, it might just as easily symbolise the freedom to sit in traffic for hours, as it serves over 150,000 vehicles per day. If Lisbon thought it could solve its traffic woes with the addition of the Vasco da Gama Bridge, it was perhaps too optimistic. Completed in 1998 and spanning a staggering 12.3 kilometres, the Vasco da Gama Bridge was touted as the solution to the overburdened 25th of April Bridge. It was, at the time, the longest bridge in Europe. Its 6 lanes of traffic were intended to relieve the overwhelming pressure on its counterpart. However, as any seasoned driver in Lisbon will tell you, if there is one certainty in life, besides death and taxes, it's that traffic will expand to fill whatever space you give it. The bridge that was meant to solve the city's traffic woes has itself become another bottleneck. Declared a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1983, the Belem Tower has become a tourist magnet, standing as a symbol of Portugal's rich maritime history. A closer look reveals the Manuel Inn style, a uniquely Portuguese blend of Gothic, Renaissance and Moorish elements that celebrates Portugal's age of exploration. To truly understand its significance, one must consider the broader historical context in which it was built. The early 16th century was the peak of the Age of Discovery, a period in which Portugal, along with Spain, dominated global exploration. The Torre de Belém served as both a literal and symbolic guardian of Lisbon's harbour, where many of these expeditions set sail. However, in true historical irony, the tower's military role quickly became obsolete. By the time it was completed, the rapid evolution of naval artillery had already rendered its design somewhat outdated. Its cannons, intended to project Portuguese military might, were soon outclassed by bigger, better weaponry. The Lisbon funicular system was first introduced in 1884, at a time when Lisbon was still catching up with the idea of modernisation. It was a moment of great progress. The funiculars, powered by water counterweights, were meant to revolutionise travel up Lisbon's steepest hills. And to be fair, they did. Eventually, the funiculars were converted to a more predictable electricity-based system, which, while not as natural as the water-driven original, has allowed them to keep climbing the hills at the breakneck speed of about 7 kilometres per hour. Today, Lisbon has 3 historic funiculars: Elevador da Glória, Elevador da Bica, and Elevador do Lavra. Each of these charming contraptions has its own character, ranging from graffiti-covered cars that look more like moving art galleries to wooden-panelled interiors that whisper of a time when things were built to last. To be fair, they offer more than just a practical means of transport. They offer an experience. There is something uniquely charming about the slow ascent and the views of Lisbon's rooftops. The Convento do Carmo, or Carmo Convent, stands as a hauntingly beautiful relic of Portugal's medieval past. Constructed in 1389 by the pious yet rather ambitious knight Nuno Álvares Pereira, this Gothic wonder was meant to symbolise Portugal's military and religious might. But then came the infamous Lisbon earthquake of 1755. On the morning of November 1st, as Lisbon's population gathered for All Saints' Day Mass, the earth decided to remind everyone of just how precarious human existence can be. All that Gothic splendour reduced to a skeleton of arches and broken walls. The nave of the church, once the jewel in Lisbon's crown, was left roofless, open to the sky. In the wake of the earthquake, Lisbon rebuilt itself, but the Convento do Carmo was left partially in ruins. Built at the dawn of the 16th century, the Mosteiro dos Jerónimos was commissioned by King Manuel I. It was constructed during a period when Portugal, a relatively small nation on the edge of Europe, found itself at the centre of an immense global empire. Thanks to navigators like Vasco da Gama, whose exploits opened the sea routes to India and other distant lands, the wealth of the world began pouring into Lisbon. The funds for this sprawling complex were largely derived from a tax on spices. The monastery itself was built to commemorate Vasco da Gama's successful voyage to India and to serve as a burial place for the royal family. The monastery's function as a religious site is evident in its many chapels, cloisters, and the church of Santa Maria, where the tomb of Vasco da Gama rests. Today, the Mosteiro dos Jerónimos is recognised as a UNESCO World Heritage Site and remains one of Lisbon's most popular tourist attractions. The Aguas Livres aqueduct, originally built in the 18th century to solve the city's water crisis, is an extravagant monument that proves even something as basic as a water supply can become a statement of royal vanity. Designed by Manuel de Maia and commissioned by King John V, the aqueduct brought water from distant springs to a parched Lisbon. Surviving even the 1755 earthquake, this engineering wonder supplied water for 2 centuries and became part of the city's identity. Yet it also had its dark moments, like its stint as a serial killer's hideout. Today, the aqueduct stands as a cultural icon and tourist attraction, long after it stopped delivering water. Located a mere 30 kilometres from Lisbon, Sintra is the ultimate day trip from the Portuguese capital. But the charm of Sintra is not simply a matter of its proximity to Lisbon, nor its cool Atlantic breeze that momentarily alleviates the heat of the city. Rather, Sintra seduces travellers with its UNESCO-listed heritage and its whimsical palaces. Upon arrival, tourists are greeted by a seemingly sleepy small town, but don't be fooled, Sintra requires a surprising amount of stamina. With its hills and sprawling estates, casual walkers may find themselves wondering whether they signed up for a hiking expedition rather than a leisurely cultural experience. To alleviate this, tuk-tuks and buses are available, though they often contribute to the sense that Sintra is less a quiet retreat and more an amusement park in peak season. The region's unique architectural assets date back to the 19th century, when it was a centre of the European Romantic movement. The Pena Palace, a hilltop wonderland of turrets, pastel colours and styles from all eras, was built as a result of King Ferdinand II's varied tastes. The palace itself is an architectural fever dream, blending Gothic, Moorish and Renaissance styles in a way that probably shouldn't work, but somehow does. Quinta da Regaleira is Sintra's most mysterious site. Built in the early 20th century, this palace and its gardens are filled with symbolism, drawing on themes from alchemy and the Knights Templar. The most famous feature of the estate is the Initiation Well, a spiral staircase that descends into the earth and is said to have been used for esoteric rituals. The gardens themselves are like a labyrinth, full of grottos, hidden tunnels, and mythological references. Have you ever been to Lisbon? Let us know in the comments. If you loved this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to support our channel.